National Symphony was the first American orchestra Slava played as a soloist. 1965, last week of November, first week of December. And what he was playing was the Symphony of Concertant for cello of Prokofiev. And we were starting the second movement, and Mitchell was conducting, and he started it with a very staid, slow tempo. Bum, 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 bum. And he stopped, he said, well, that's as fast as that can go. Rostropovich turned up. Young man, skinny. And so we started, bum, dum, dum, dum. And he took off.
His very first rehearsal, his very first guest conducting, he came out and did Francesca, started with Francesca da Rimini. And Francesca da Rimini starts with that, and it took him about 10 minutes to get us to play it the way he wanted it, as loud, you know, with the basses and everything. In fact, some of the basses, you know, the basses, when they really want, they stamp on the floor. When they bring a down bow, they stamp on the floor to make it sound louder. And I knew we were in for it that first when he guest conducted us the first time.
He chose to do the Tchaikovsky Sixth Symphony, which, as you well know, starts with an interval in the basses, just a hum. And I'm supposed to come in very, very softly, velvety, so on. So, seconds before, I'm supposed to come in on that low E, which is very hard to do on a bassoon. It doesn't lend itself to playing softly in the very low register. Anyway, it should have been a bass clarinet, really. This is what he does to get me to know what to do. That's the way he went. So I looked at that, and it freaked me out. And I got very upset, but I got through it. At intermission, I stormed. I said, don't ever do that to me. If you want me to play softly, suggest it. Don't get grotesque. His eyes got huge. I said, all right, okay. So comes the concert, he goes,
Rostropovich is going to be your next music director. We don't know how he will be, what kind of a conductor he is, but I can promise you it'll be exciting. And Girardi hit the nail on the head. It was exciting.
I grew up here, and I had the good fortune around 1975, I think, when he first guest conducted here, to go to one of those concerts and to feel this kind of amazing personality and amazing electricity and an amazing kind of passion coming off of the stage. And I think he was appointed music director almost immediately. I think, frankly, somewhat to the chagrin of Dorati, who was, I think, ready to retire but didn't expect this transition. But the management, and I think they sensed the public, saw something, and they were afraid somebody else would grab him, and they grabbed him.
Slava came as a guest conductor, and Washington loves celebrity, loves fame, loves glamour, and my goodness, he had that. And I think both Washington and Slava loved the fact that this escapee from communism was going to head the orchestra in the capital of the United States.
When he was given the job here, quite a few people, including me, whose opinion didn't matter that much, were really skeptical about this and thought it was just a political gesture and what does he know about conducting as a great cellist? But I think Martin Feinstein, who liked to collect decorations, should have got one for suggesting that we hire Slava. It was the best thing ever to happen to this orchestra.
There was a debate over salary, and I think Krieger was not offering him what he wanted, what he wanted was the salary equivalent to the top orchestras. I got into the act by persuading Dave that we got to do, I think it's worth it to get Slava, because he was very engaging that first evening. Even then he was running around hugging everybody in the apartment. So the deal that we made was to pay him less than he wanted, but we'd add to that later on. Dave offered him $200,000, he wanted $300,000. And I got into the act by saying, well, if you can't get together, promise to do it later when he's, and we did when I was president.
And in Russia, rehearsal starts when they say, and it goes till the conductor's finished. And little things like time restraints and that sort of thing were difficult for him to accept. And if he was in a bit of a panic anyway for some reason, it was even harder for him to accept and very upsetting for him sometimes.
Slava kind of did what he wanted. I think you would agree with that. I mean, he had his way, and he would do things and talk about them later. I mean, if we had to go overtime, there was nothing we could do. Leonard Bernstein was the hardest to stop, but Slava was pretty difficult too. One time Fogel came out on the stage and tried to stop him. We were traveling. I think we were in Europe, and we were going overtime for sure in a tour rehearsal, and there was no way I was going out there and stop Slava. He was an intense fellow, but he was even more intense when we were traveling and we were going to play in London or Paris or some of the big capitals of Europe.
You have to realize that Slava's world, when he was exposed to America full-time, he had a very difficult time understanding American society. As far as the orchestra was concerned, there were two things that absolutely flabbergasted him totally. His relationship with the female players, he could never understand sexual harassment, and fundraising. In the Soviet Union, a conductor was God and king, and it was without appeal. The word went, they had total control, they had total power. He could not only get you fired, he could get your kids thrown out of school. And here, he had to go to the orchestra committee. He was not fond of the orchestra committee.
When I was doing committee work, we could be at each other's throats, which we weren't often, but once in a while I had to say, look, I don't care what you think, this is the way it's going to be. Or if you want us to play at all. And we could be at sharp loggerheads in conversation in his room, and he never carried that on stage. He was never unpleasant to me on stage.
When I came You know, you come and you're all excited because, oh boy, you know, you're going to go to work Tuesday morning, and we got to the Kennedy Center and then it was locked up shut because the orchestra was on strike. And so we had a picket line. We were walking along on the plaza with the cards, and here comes this car, and Slava gets out and starts walking around with the musicians. He had this incredible solidarity with the musicians, and of course, this was not quite the reaction that the opposing side wanted to see.
And he said, no, absolutely not. The Paganini makes this great impact. I must show the Europeans that we have a great violin section. So I thought, okay, I tried. I'm going to go back to that group of violinists and tell them I tried, but he's going to do it. And to my shock, they said to me, no, we will not play it. We will refuse to stand, and we will refuse to play it. He can point at us, but we're not going to play it. We can't. We'll leave this tour with wrist and arm and shoulder injuries, and we won't do it. And I thought, uh-oh, now I have an interesting problem. And if I make this a war, he's going to have to win. What do I do? And I thought for a little minute. I didn't know what I was going to do. I went back to him and I pleaded. I said, look, I've talked to them. I've never seen a group of musicians feel so strongly about something. And I'm going to be honest with you, I believe them. Well, it turned out, I don't know whether you would say I should or I shouldn't have said that, because he looked at me and he said, Enrichka, who knows more about string playing, me or you? And I have no idea what got into me, none. But I looked at him right in the eye and I said, me. I said that, I've never played a string instrument in my life, to the greatest cellist in the world. And his jaw dropped, and he just said, what? I said, frankly, you're not human. I've seen you not play the cello, not touch a cello for a week and a half, and then pick it up and play it perfectly. I've seen you do cello marathons that no other string player in the world could do. 3 concertos a night for 2 or 3 nights in a row. I said, I don't think you understand what it's like to be normal. You're superhuman. And he looked at me and he said, now I see why they hire you. You very smart. You use flattery to get what you want. Tell them okay.
His ability to communicate through music, such emotion, such feeling, such a language that he used, that there was nothing you could do but be compelled to join him and listen to him.
And he never ceased to probe and to search and to mine this music, and he demanded that everybody go with him on this journey. But he expected from himself, he demanded of himself the utmost disposition to find the greatness and to bring it up and make it reify it, you know. And he demanded that of us. Well, it was easy for us because you could see him put himself on the line, demanding of himself that he find this thing he was constantly devoted to.
Every concert was a life or death experience, that everything was so important, so musically important, and that Slava's expectations were so high. And we all felt that we had to live up to those expectations. It wasn't fear, it was exhilaration, and that I've got to be able to figure out how to do this to satisfy whatever he wanted.
He made his point through the emotional aspect of the music. It was really a very exciting time. I mean, the orchestra was really hyped. Ultimately, he got his message across through his emotions and his incredible way of expressing how he wanted things to sound.
I mean, to have the scope of music that he had and understood, you're already so another level, as he used to say. That was his famous thing. Remember that? Oh, that's whole another level. And what conducting and what he got out of us. I think that's the key. I think is his ability to produce and get out of us what he needed. Because I mean, let's face it, we were known as the greatest Russian orchestra outside of the Soviet Union.
Committed to what he was doing. He was stubborn to get what he wanted. His mind was on the music when he conducted so much. His playing, his music was so passionate. I mean, he was on almost another level than I'd ever seen. His face was very expressive. You know, I go conductor by the hands, but I look at the face a lot. He had an incredibly expressive face. His face was all kinds of expressions: happy, disappointed, melancholy.
Face would turn red. Sometimes his tongue would hang out, and he would just have these ferocious expressions, and somehow you made you play. But when he wasn't getting what he wanted, he would get very upset about it, and let you know. I mean, on stage, and he would look at people, glare at them, and the jaw would come out, and and his eyes would.
He would stare people down. In rehearsals at concerts, or he'd point. He wanted you to play. He wanted you to always give everything. And he would look around and he'd see people, no emotion, no anything. And that made him so upset. And sometimes it would make him angry, I think, because he would see other people with so much passion, so much wanting to play, and really, really giving their all.
I think the most intimidating thing was in a rehearsal. And he would stop the entire orchestra and he would point to an individual player. Like to me, he's done this to me, I'm sure he did it to you. He would stop and he would say, "This fingering no good." And he would show you on his arm, "Second finger much better." And you would think, oh my gosh, he's right, until you pick up your pencil and you write a second finger over that F because you had played it with a first finger and it didn't work, and he had seen it and he had stopped the whole orchestra, and this is so embarrassing. And then he would back up 4 measures and we would play it again, and he would stare at you to see if you used the fingering that he told you to use.
But we played in Pompeii, and this awful volcano dust, this lava dust was just everywhere, and it was just, I just felt really, didn't want to be there, and it was yucky and everything. And so we were playing Tchaikovsky Fifth, and there was a place where the cellos play this theme, in the 4th position, and I slid up the D string, had this horrible, and he sort of looked around at the section, and of course everybody, sat with a stone face. The next day, I'm walking around the backstage area, which was outdoors among the lockers and trunks and things, and he comes to me, comes up and goes, "Bobchik," he says, "I have a favor to ask." So, well, sure, anything. He says, all another your colleagues play, this place in first movement Tchaikovsky. He says, all another your colleagues play on A string. You play on D string. He says, maybe for me you play on A string. I said, well, of course I will. He could have, just torn me a new orifice, but he thought he knew that he would get better results if he did it this way. And, and so, but every time we played that piece, I mean, for the next years, every time we came there, he'd turn around and look at me. When we came there, I mean, for years, not just the rest of that tour.
Somebody, I know who body, but I not publish. Somebody's not doing their job. I know who the person is, but I'm not going to tell everybody. That's called fear factor, and I tell you, it's the greatest motivator in my life. And I loved it. I lived off of it because rather than fail, I would go the extra mile, to really put up.
This was a man, an historic figure. I mean, in the time frame of this. Besides his incredible music, besides the fact that he was not an aristocratic Russian. He was a peasant with unbelievable talent.
When I conducting, I have not contact direct with instrument. I have contact only with human being. And human being must be understand what I like, what I would like produce. And he produce, not I produce sound. That's why very important for a conductor, he must have good relation, human relation with his musicians. Because if some flutist don't like conductor, and you explain for him how you like here, and he think in this moment, go to hell with your mind. I play what I like, and that sometimes, and that's coming difficult. That's why for me, as conductor, all my life, I would like first established and build my human relationship with my friends.
He lived life for his connections to music and the connections to people that come from the connections to music. I think he needed always to be surrounded by people.
I never conduct instruments. I conduct the people who play them. We are equals marching in service of our God, music.
With Slava, I think part of his secret of drawing out the members of the orchestra was the connection, the human connection that he would make with people, members of the orchestra.
Slava really was, he really felt that we were his family.
Оркестр в качестве главного дирижера, потому что этот оркестр, так сказать, моя семья музыкальная.
And we were his friends. I know I suppose there were people who would disagree with that.
He was like the perfect uncle in a way. I mean, he just wanted everyone to be well and to be happy and to play music. He says, we are here to play music, make music together. But he was larger than life. I mean, he was Slava. And from day one, he was warm and you could go to talk to him. He wasn't aloof. He was a genuine human being.
I think it was kind of important that we got along as an orchestra, that we didn't view him as an enemy, but as a colleague. I always said, my friends.
He made every player feel very important, and not just someone who is in a section, whether you were a soloist, section leader, or last chair in a section. He wanted all of us to have that degree of him feeling and knowing that each of us is important.
You know, we loved him and we wanted to play our best for him. We understood him, and we knew what he wanted. After many years, of course. But I mean, even right away, we knew what he wanted, and we did our best. But it was very inspiring to be around him because of his personality.
I think he had real insight into human beings. He knew all about relationships and how your heart works and how people feel about each other. I think on a very deep level.
His whole sense of family, it just made a whole for tight music making. Now, when he was on the podium, it was all about making music. But we were still a family, to everybody. And that's how he also he took personal interest in our life.
Because he had needs to be filled, and he looked to us to fill those needs. In many cases, and for a long time, we did. And that was plus the fact that each one of us in the most humble position in the orchestra had a window into something in history. It was so great, so unusual.
I think he wanted to get this group of musicians to be unified not only in their playing, but unified in their spirit. You could, even on nights where there might have been something technically that didn't go right, you could not be uninvolved from the audience perspective with the performance. You couldn't be. It wasn't possible to be detached from what was going on the stage because everybody was just...
I think he made friends, and he needed friends, and he wanted to feel that he was loved. Even there would be moments when he'd be angry at someone. They made a mistake in a concert, or they didn't do what he wanted. But he wanted to feel that he could change you, mold you.
And he was molding us. And of course, he was the international figure. He was the man of the hour and an historical figure and a revered presence. But he shared it. It was our orchestra.
He wasn't just there for the concerts. He was there for the musical life of the city, and he cared what happened even when he wasn't around. But he was very protective of those of us that he had hired. He hired 17 people the first year.
The first couple of years of his time here were terrifying, at least for the winds. I mean, he came in, the fall, I think it was 78. The first beginning as music director, they scheduled a whole week of rehearsals. We had 8 rehearsals that week, no performances. And he rehearsed the Manfred Symphony of Tchaikovsky just to death. And somewhere in that first 3 or 4 weeks, he fired a handful of people.
This orchestra became his orchestra. He was the only conductor we had that really created his sound. We were his orchestra. We were a Russian orchestra.
For him, the orchestra was this giant instrument that he could play. Not physically, because you can't play all these different instruments, and he would never have been able to play the clarinet. But as a conductor, he could play the clarinet. And so for him, it was like controlling this gigantic instrument, and that's what I think was so fulfilling to him.
Slava had as deep an understanding of music as any human being to ever walk the face of the map. He got it. You could never argue that it was boring. It was compelling. It was gutsy. He was a real man on that podium. There wasn't anything flashy or, it was guts. And no, it wasn't always pretty. He was a little lumbery sometimes, didn't always look perfectly balletic. But that's not what conducting is. Conducting isn't the pretty art of dancing elegantly on the podium so that the audience thinks you look great. Conducting is the art of drawing a powerful performance out of these human beings. And he did that brilliantly. He was a huge star. He, like any huge star, he had an ego. He wanted the spotlight, and there was nothing wrong with that. But at the end of the day, he knew what his place was in this process, that the grandest and most celebrated and most important genius is that of the composer, and that we, the performers, even if we do our job brilliantly well, that spark of genius is really the top of the mountain, and that gesture is so beautiful that he always did that.
It wasn't his interpretation. It was what he felt the composer intended. He always came from that point of view. He was very modest in that way. I mean, he obviously knew he was a great musician, but he didn't go around advertising that.
Expected you to rise to whatever challenge he threw at you, and I never got the sense he was worried about it. He trusted us to do what needed to be done, and I think all of us, certainly for me, it was an incredible challenge. We worked really, really hard, but it taught me a lot. It taught me about myself. It taught me what hard work could help you achieve, and challenges like that. I knew that if I could do that, then there were few challenges that would be more daunting in my career. To do the Dutia Concerto in London as my London premiere.
The physical aspect of a performance, live performance, was very important to Slava, what it looked like. And the leaping out on the stage, I think, was very much a part of that. When you came to Slava's performances, live performances, it was a different experience than hearing him on recordings. His recordings were wonderful, just perfect cello playing, and with the orchestra, he would always make sure that everything was just right before it went out on a recording. But to really experience Slava as a performer, you had to be there for a live performance. When you saw him concentrating all of his focus on one note or one solo part, we saw that all the time with him.
We did Daphnis, probably when I did it for the first time. He called me into the conductor's room and he started playing the accompaniment on the piano, the chords and everything. And he says, "Make it sound like it's in Africa." And I that was sort of blew my mind because I never thought of African. So here I am, a Japanese flutist, playing for a Russian conductor in America, pretending to be in Africa, playing a French piece.
Conduct in a certain way that we understood that particular language, because it was a language. Slava had a language when he conducted. I mean, he had certain facial expressions that I haven't seen anybody with facial expressions like that in my life. We go back to the things that he taught us about the individual nuance for vibrato. Who thought that up? That's him. And to make the shimmering effect for tremolo.
One time he was saying, when he wanted something very smooth, and he said, fingers must be soft like spaghetti boiled 1 hour. So, instead of picking up the finger, he wanted, just gently,
He was the opposite of just playing it nicely or okay. That was the opposite. I mean, always everything had to have so much character, even if it's afterbeats or melodies have to be very distinctive. I mean, he took that to sometimes almost ridiculous extremes, to really long or really short. But his idea was color and contrast and playing things in an interesting manner. That was paramount to him, more probably than even ensemble or intonation or. That was almost less important to him. It was more this effect, playing with a lot of character. I would say that you might have somebody playing, they play a solo just finely and calmly, and he'd look back like, "What's that?" Like, come on, you got more than that, don't you?
It was the force of his personality, not the stick that was important. It was the drive. I mean, the pacing, the energy, and the repose. Sometimes the stillness of him in drawing out something that you thought, oh, I can't possibly hold a note this long, but then you had to, and you did it because that was what he wanted, and that was what was needed. So I don't need this, There was very little just middle ground. There had to be something searing or something eerie or some expressing some emotion, and I think that was what was unique about us.
And it was all about differences in sound, and he was an absolute master at coming up with analogies. So he would say, here you play this phrase, but it must sound like a happy person. And here, when you play this phrase, it's the same person, but they just got bad news.
Because I would like a little bit provoked some imagination. Because music is like life. That if you hear some music, you sometimes must have some feeling for vision. Or also not only for your ears, also for your eyes.
We probably could play the loudest of any orchestra and the softest of any orchestra. And this was what Slava demanded of us.
He understood the physical attribute of sustention of sound. When he conducted, you didn't get pointed at and say, now go into your act. When he conducted, he pulled you through it.
And he was able to express what he needed to with his body language, with his facial expressions. He wanted it to be devastating.
Fredericky, when you come in first movement of Tchaikovsky's Sixth, after quiet bass clarinet, 6 women in front row must die of heart attack.
He was trying to get across, you know, and he just couldn't get it across. And finally he said to the upper string, he says, "You must play this like you have fork in brain." That got the point, just the image of that, like, got the point across. And immediately it was there. Like one time he said he wanted the cymbal to sound like every glass in Washington, D.C. was breaking at the same time. Every water glass, you know. He was maybe over the top, but he got his point across. And ultimately, the musical impact was there.
He adored practical jokes. He was the worst practical joker. He loved puns. He loved wordplay. He was very, very witty. And of course, he knew more anecdotes and jokes, both totally pristine and very vulgar. And Soviet musicians in particular have very, very dirty mouths.
Anyway, we got out on stage. We're getting set, you know, he sits in his chair and he's, what? I thought, oh my God, what happened? Did he forget something? Did he forget his blow open? No, his blow open. He said, I have different shoes on tonight. I'm thinking, what does that mean? And afterwards he said, well, I really noticed things like that. And one night a conductor had different shoes on than they had worn before, and it really threw me.
At a rehearsal of the Beethoven Fifth Symphony, it was up in one of the rehearsal rooms upstairs, a very uncomfortable place. The principal bass player had brought in, as a joke, a wig, this blonde wig that his wife had, and Steve Brewster, he was totally bald, and he was wearing it as a joke. And Slava looked back and said, "No, Steve, me, give to me, I need." And so they passed up this wig, and Rostropovich, at the beginning of the rehearsal, put on a big blonde wig. And there he looked like Elvis Presley. All of a sudden, it was just such a strange. Well, of course, everybody was screaming with laughter at this sight.
In this particular town, Galina was going to give a recital, and Slava was going to play the piano. And apparently, this fellow was hanging around, and Slava always had his hangers-on. People who I met probably 10,000 or 15,000 people who claimed to be students of Slava. I mean, I sometimes had the feeling that if they were in the same room with him, they became a student of Slava. And this one particular man, I guess, was particularly irritating to Slava. He was kind of the dilettante kind of a fellow, you know, and he was hanging around Slava, hanging around. and he was a musician, an amateur musician. In any case, Slava asked him if he'd like to turn pages at Galina's recital, and turn Slava's music pages. The guy said, "Oh, yes. So Slava was very mischievous. To say the least, he was very mischievous. And Slava's playing, and this guy's, and Slava says, no. The guy goes to turn the page, and Slava says, no. And then you say, oh, page. He would turn to page. And through the whole recital, he gave this guy the ride of his life. And of course, Slava had the whole thing memorized. He didn't even have to have the music there.
President Reagan and members of the cabinet and Senate, and there we were. We had not rehearsed yet. It was a 20-minute program. We went into the living room and we rehearsed quietly and in double tempo, 10 minutes to get through the whole program.
Isaac Stern, of course, was his friend. And was it Isaac Stern's, 75th birthday or something? And they had this big celebration in San Francisco, and the orchestra started to play something from Tchaikovsky, maybe Swan Lake. And this very, very large ballerina comes out in a pink tutu dancing, and it was Slava in a pink tutu.
One of the Capitol concerts, I think it was the 4th of July concert, it was just ready to be held all day long. And we straggled in there, and Rostropovich just out on the lawn with his fat legs rolled up, splashing around with the crowd, doing it a conga line kind of thing.
In Alaska, in our first residency, when Slava got up on the stage with the native drummers and started drumming with him. I mean, he was not afraid to do something that was totally out of his element. He wanted to experience whatever he could. I mean, it made everybody else kind of feel like, you gotta just try things in life.
So he gets a replacement dog, same variety, named Mucha, which means flea in Russian, I think. And I was subject to, these were my years, my middle years as assistant associate conductor, and then as a guest conductor with him. And so I was part of the training process of this dog. And so I'm conducting the New Mexico Symphony, and he comes out with Mucha on a leash, and he puts and we've already started the introduction to the Dvorak, which was quite long, and he was late, and I thought, I'm not going to waste rehearsal time, So he sticks the leash under a chair, and the dog, of course, starts running around as far as the leash can go, which gets, less and less, and then the other way, and then the other way. And then finally, he settles down and appears to go to sleep. It's a long introduction. And finally, the orchestra diminuendos is that wonderful chord in the trombones, and Slava comes in, dee, and the dog absolutely goes straight up. I've never seen a dog go straight up in the air and screams, and so the place was, the rehearsal was over for 5 minutes, talking about the ultimate critic, greatest sounding cellist of all time, and the dog has a stroke. So later that afternoon, at 4 o'clock, the phone rings in my dressing room. Andrushka, idisoda! Come immediately, and I was like, oh God, and he's going to scream at me about something I did in the second movement, maybe, I don't know. So I went upstairs as fast as I could to his dressing room, knocked on the door, come in, sit there, Mucha, igrai. So I'm like, okay, it's not about me anyway. So the dog comes running across the room, jumps up on the table where I now see there's a toy piano. And the dog starts banging on the toy piano with the paws. And he looks at me and he goes, genius dog. I had a genius dog.
underline the fact that both myself and all my family remain Soviet citizens.
Я хочу сказать, что я очень глубоко и искренне люблю свою родину и свой народ.
And I'd also like to say that I love very deeply and very sincerely my country and my people.
If you deny the soil of Mother Russia to a Russian, you have wounded them so deeply. And he was wounded very deeply and stood up to it.
Here is my orchestra, and you would not allow me to do this over here, so I'm bringing them along. You know, this is my group now. Boom, we come, package deal.
I think that's the closest to feeling like kind of like a rock star as an orchestra. Of course, Slava being the #1 rock star, but our orchestra too was treated like, wow, all this attention, all this press, all people as you're walking out of the hall before and after coming to rehearsals. It's such interest in us, unprecedented. I don't think we've ever had any publicity quite like that. And I think bringing an American orchestra playing their music, Russian, Prokofiev, Tchaikovsky, and Shostakovich, bringing their music over and playing it with his interpretation with an American orchestra, that's a big deal.
He had not been able to sleep, so he went out in the street and he was walking down the street, and it's like 5 o'clock in the morning, and some old lady is out sweeping the sidewalk or shoveling the snow because it was the middle of winter. And she stopped and she said, "Slava Rostropovich?" And he said, "Yes." And she said, "I thought you were dead. It's a miracle." And they all treated him like it was a miracle that we were there, that he was alive, that he was still playing, he was still conducting. Even just the dress rehearsal, and they allowed audience into the dress rehearsal. And in the back of the hall in the Moscow Conservatory, I mean, there's the nice seats up front, but in the back, it's just these benches, like I'm sitting on here, these hard benches. And maybe there's supposed to be 5 people in one bench, and there'd be like 12 people just jammed in there like sardines, and they had all paid their 5 rubles, and they were going to see this if it was the last thing. And you just looked at them and you saw how desperate they were, and you realized he wasn't kidding. It really was like life and death to them. And they brought these flowers, bouquets of flowers, and they come up to the podium afterwards and they put these flowers. And it was like somebody died. There was this mountain of flowers on the podium after the concert.
You remember the people that were in the heating ducts. I mean, they crawled into the ducts and they were looking through. I remember looking up in the hall in Moscow and looking up there and seeing faces of young people, you know, peering down through the ductwork.
We were like a rock artists. I mean, we showed up with him, and it was, I mean, the city of Moscow was like at our feet. I mean, I'll never forget the rehearsal we had. I mean, it was, and the rehearsal, I mean, you know, people were hanging out off it seemed almost hanging off a ceiling. I mean, it was, I don't know, it was a big deal, a very big deal. I'd never been involved in such a big thing as that.
There was a bunch of people, young and old, with pieces of paper in their hands and reaching over the heads of the other people to give these notes to Slava. So when I had a chance a couple of days later to address that puzzlement to Slava, he said, oh, they were reminding me that they crossed the street so they wouldn't talk to me and so on. And I want to apologize to you, Slava. It was very touching.
I often felt, or maybe it's because, like when we played the 8th, you know, we got to play it in Leningrad where Shostakovich was living when he wrote it. You felt like it was an important part of history to be playing these pieces. It wasn't just like, oh yeah, we're going to play this concert. You felt like this was somehow a turning point in history. The fact that this music could come alive and could be played in this place where this man had been persecuted. You were giving the audience a chance to hear this music that they had never heard before. It was so thrilling to be part of that whole thing.
I remember his playing the Dvorak cello concerto. That is one of the most significant moments in my whole orchestra career. I just still cry when I think about it. because it was just such amazing playing and thinking of him in his homeland, and you know, having had to leave.
Probably every member of the orchestra came up to me at some point in those months prior to the Russian trip and said, "Listen, I got to tell you, Slav's a little tricky to follow. We've had any number of assistant conductors do this. It's, you know, some have done better than others. Don't take it personally. He's brutal to young conductors." So, I was prepared. I was totally prepared, musically and psychologically. We get to the first rehearsal, which was here in D.C., and mostly he was rehearsing the orchestra, and I was just waving my stick, which was fine. I kept expecting him to humiliate me, you know what I'm saying, and he didn't. Then we had the second rehearsal in D.C. again. I'm all bracing myself, ready for a tough love. All smiles, all everything great, no problem. I even pulled him aside at some point before we flew to first to Japan, if you remember, and said, "Slav, is everything I'm doing okay?" Because I was so nervous, for God's sakes. No, Randichka. That's what he always called me, Randichka. No, it's fine. We get to the rehearsal before the first performance in Japan, and he raked me over the coals. You probably have forgotten this. In front of the orchestra, it was like it was supposed to be a 20-minute sound check for an hour and a half non-stop humiliation. I didn't do anything right for that 90 minutes, and I was furious. I loved him already, but I was furiously mad with him. Furious. And I'm like, you know, I'm throwing my tuxedo on. I'm going to show you. And I walked out mad as hell and conducted the performance of my life. You know, he was a brilliant psychologist. At some point or other, he wanted me to ratchet my performing ability, my performing energy, everything that makes a champion. He wanted to get that welled up in me. And he used humiliation / anger, my anger, to do it. And it worked out.
I felt so sorry for Slava in Moscow when we were playing it, and the guy with the television camera was 2 feet in front of him, and he just wouldn't desist from. And I know that had to upset Slava.
He starts to get mad. He starts to get a look in his eye. I'm like, my God, he's mad. And of course I thought he was mad at me, you know. And then at one point, I'm sure you remember, he shook his bow at somebody. And I'm like, oh my God, this is terrible. Well, you guys probably never do this. Of course, the Dvorak ends with this huge fanfare. Audience goes bananas. The bravos are deafening. Slava and I bow, we walk off stage. He walks all the way upstairs to his dressing room, throws his Strad cello, throws it on the couch. And I'm like a little puppy dog, just following him up the stairs. You know? He's cursing in Russian. He walks back downstairs, and then he goes out and takes his solo bow. And of course, Peter Gelb and Stephen Klein, they all look at me like, what happened? And my answer was, I don't know. I have no idea. At that point, I didn't know what he was mad about. So he comes back off stage. Now he starts to curse in English, and I knew what those words meant. And then he and I walk back on for, the second bow. And I'm crushed inside because I'm thinking I screwed it up, which I didn't. Well, so of course we now know it was this photographer that distracted him. And look, tensions were high at that moment. After all he'd been through 18 years, there are many great Russian conductors. There's only one Rostropovich. So.
To say one of them was the Red Square, it was a very strange time. It was very cold. People were worried about their instruments cracking in the cold. We were all bundled up to go out there, but the management, I remember we had a meeting of the orchestra, and there were some people saying we shouldn't be going out there because we won't be able to play that well. But most of us felt this is something that we need to do because all these Russian people are going to come. And it was just jammed. I remember looking out there from one end to the other, there were people lined up in the streets, and there was Slava, dressed up in his suit, and he wasn't bundled up or anything like that, with his hair blowing every which way in the wind, and we played. It was just such an excitement and an electricity, and that was Slava.
It was almost too much to take in. I mean, it was just such a huge event. I mean, everything from the music to the location to the people involved. The Red Square concert was just mind-boggling, and it's not only in its complexity, but in the number of people who were there. And there we are, with the bells going off at of St. Basil's after the 1812. I mean,
we were having terrible problems with the sound. And Rostropovich kept turning around, Slava kept turning around to me and saying, "Randy, does it sound okay?" And I said, "No, Slava, it doesn't. It's way too boomy. I can't hear any separation. It sounds terrible." Okay, go tell him. So I told him, and Nadia translated. And 3 or 4 times he would ask me, "Is it okay?" I'm like, "No, it sounds terrible," which was my honest response. I wasn't going to lie to you. So finally he says, "Here, you conduct." And I conducted the ending of 1812 Overture. At 18, with the Red Army Band, 80 musicians over there, the Marine, whatever there's, and I conducted the ending, and everything. And he's back there cursing and yelling at the sound guys, like, "I'm going to cancel concert," Yeltsin was there, and the ringing of the church bells at the end. I mean, I was in tears at the moment. I still get choked up thinking about it.
Rostropovich told me, "Slava, we all soldiers for the music. Between us don't exist generals. We all soldiers."
There are days where we all have them where you don't want to face the music. And you just having a soundtrack that plays that in your inner ear is all you need, because he would have darn well gotten up there and done it. I mean, we know that he didn't want to get out of bed every day of the year. That's impossible. Nobody does. But he never showed that.
It is playing injured, playing sick, and even like him, well, you remember when he had the 6 dental implants in his mouth in California, and he flew across country at a morning rehearsal, and he's like, because he couldn't talk. That's a soldier for music, the show is going to go on no matter what.
We are artists here to take what was put in print and bring it to life as if we're embodiment of the composer. That's the way I saw it.
Before Slava was exiled from the Soviet Union, they had taken away all his rights to perform outside the Soviet Union, and the only concerts they gave him were literally in the middle of nowhere, and he thought that was going to be the rest of his career. But he still took great pride in what he did. So, yeah, you go to Agrigento. Now, maybe Agrigento is not the capital of the world, but when he goes there, it's the most important place in his life at that moment. And, you know, audiences feel that too.
Growing up in the Soviet Union and experiencing a period of kind of banishment prior to coming to the West when he was in trouble with the authorities for housing Solzhenitsyn. He was forced into the boondocks and did lots of menial concert work, and I'm sure he didn't, for sense of pride, purpose, who he was, what music meant to him, he didn't give an inch, and he never would have. And I think that's where Soldier for Music came from in his vocabulary. And I think he wanted to impart that to us, living, you know, a well-off life in the cushy Western Hemisphere. You know, we can easily fall victim of, oh, this is not worth it for us. And he would never, ever say or feel that.
He would try to rally everyone as if they were regimented in lines and marching down to say music is a great presence in our world, and we're here to make sure that this art is available to everyone and is able to knit our souls back together and to inspire us and move us and remind us, keep us in touch with the deepest part of our humanity.
Belief in what we might call the common man, and how important it was for everybody to be able to have their voice heard. And I think that his impact on the orchestra was felt year-round with this organization, and that I think the people who were here when he was here really knew that how much he loved this orchestra and really felt that this was his home now.
I just think he should be remembered as someone who was incredibly committed to the orchestra and committed to making his orchestra into a better orchestra, and committed to giving each musician the feeling that they made a difference.
How fortunate I was to be a part of this extraordinary scene, this extraordinary adventure.
Having that association in my life was just such a wonderful, unforgettable time.
There was nothing like playing a Shostakovich symphony with him. I mean, his interpretation of Shostakovich and Prokofiev and Tchaikovsky, it was fabulous. So, you know, I hope that the folks in the orchestra had as good a time as I had, because this was once in a lifetime. Playing these pieces with Slava, because here he's first generation from Shostakovich and Prokofiev, and he knew Tchaikovsky like the back of his hand.
The one and only genius is Slava. His musical genius, a personal genius. I think he's really underrated in a lot of ways. People don't realize the breadth of his musical intelligence and the depth of his ability. It was just astonishing, and to be able to work with that every day.
Big touring and recording that I don't think had been done on a big scale. You know, we toured everywhere. We saw places I don't think we'll ever see again. He toured everywhere, and we made almost all the Shostakovich symphonies, a lot of them, and very good recordings. When I listen back, I can hear that passion and interpretation of his Russian music that was unmistakable. And I'm very proud of those recordings. I think we all should be.
It was larger than life. I mean, you don't see people like that. You know, much in a couple hundred years. I mean, he defined the art of his age.
Slava dragged us into the big time. No question about it. No question about it.
The golden years were certainly with Slava. You know, everything involved, all the traveling, the recording, we did everything with him.
These glorious days that we had making music around the world, here and around the world, but feeling like it was so vital to our existence and the community, that this was something that had to be said.
I would hope that Slava's remembered as a conductor the way he's remembered as a cellist, that a man that had a profound impact on the orchestral landscape. He commissioned works, he connected orchestras to music that they maybe didn't have a strong connection to, and he connected audiences to a vast repertoire that he learned as deeply as he learned the cello repertoire.
I think why that so deep sleep our colleagues in time Mozart and time Beethoven, and I think at least I must not sleep now.
He believed in the importance of creating repertoire more so than any other star I know of in my lifetime.
He was a great soul. He was a great heart, great generosity. He would give you the shirt off his back. He never flagged in his energy or commitment. He was a force of nature. That's an oft-used and oft-abused term, but he truly was a force of nature. I mean, it was overwhelming, the resources that issued forth from his entire persona.
He said, I want to start a foundation for children. And he said, the first thing I'll do is do a concert to help children. And it began at the Russian embassy. We came up with the idea of vaccinations. And that has led now, since that time, we have vaccinated more than 40 million children.
He watched everybody. It's like I sometimes think he's up there like I don't know if a saint, I hope so. Just looking down on all of us and helping us.
That feeling of touching greatness, I think that's what we felt with Slava, as cellists and as members of the orchestra.
I love him to this day, and I will always love Slava. And I just feel like he gave me so much musically, and he gave this orchestra a life.
A man would gladly, without hesitation, spit in the eye of the devil. He knew he had misgivings, but he knew no fear. His guts, maybe his naivete, was such that he would not be intimidated by anyone or anything.
He was our father. He was a father figure to us. When he came here, we had really no way of honoring our retirees. And he started this the wonderful wall we have in our lounge.
Slava lived more in one day than I live in 10 years. He was larger than life. He was a very warm, kind person. He wanted to be involved in everyone's life in a way to make your life better.
He knew you as a person, not just as a player or some number or something. You know, he really cared about you as a person. He knew about your family and
as an overall personality who just embraced you, embraced everybody. There was nothing like Slava.
I think his interpretations were for the ages. They were amazing in their intensity, they were amazing in their drama, they were amazing in their passion.
He didn't repress his feelings. If he was happy, you knew it, and he behaved that way. When he was angry, you knew it. But I miss him. I miss him. And it makes me sometimes feel like crying. I miss him so much. But also, I have in mind he could be a son of a gun, a son of a bitch. Tough.
I look on those years very fondly. I felt I was really touched by a truly great man and musician. Really. Absolutely.
Often I'll say, well, you know, Slava used to do this or used to do that. He's a presence in my mind and in my heart ongoing. Slava's still alive, you know, in me.
Not only think about him, I dream about him. Quite often. Pointing me in the right direction. I think he was one of my best friends.
There have been several times where I've wept openly. You know, I wept openly watching the news that day, and when he died. I wept openly when I was actually in Sydney, Australia, when I heard the news that he died, and I just sat and wept.
It's just like a light. Someone had turned a light off, and that light wasn't going to come on again. You know, he was just one of the givens in our lives. We thought he'd live forever because he was more than just a person. He was a force. And now that light was out, and that force would have to take a different form, and that is his legacy through recording and memories and the people who lived on beyond him, starting with his family and certainly all of his students and all the musicians who were blessed to work with him, and learned through him just how high you can reach in your struggle to fulfill your art and be all that you can be. He was a shining example of just what it is to extend yourself as far as possible.